Yatra went on, and Srila Prabhupada's speaking engagement went on in the Melbourne City Hall, and newspapers gave us favorable reviews.
When Prabhupada came in for Rath Yatra, it was midwinter, June. That was partly because he had told Madhavisa, if you become the #1 book distributors in the world, then I'll come. And so we did, actually. We had he organised the BBT party, and Australia was consistently at the top of the book distribution ratings, even though we were just a tiny yatra at that time, maybe about 50 or 60 devotees in the whole country. But Prabhupada kept his word, and he came in '74.
It was in the middle of the Melbourne winter. It was very, very cold. It was about, probably that day was about 12 degrees. Prabhupada came and joined us about halfway through the parade in Collins Street. And of course, when Prabhupada arrived in the actual parade, the devotees were in ecstasy. And in front of the Rath Yatra cart, we had this big diorama of Lord Chaitanya, big golden diorama. He was about 14 feet high. He was following in front of the Rath cart, and we were walking in front of Lord Chaitanya. And every now and again, Prabhupada would stop, and he would turn around and he would just look at Lord Chaitanya in complete ecstasy. Right? Then he would look at Lord Jagannath. And you see in these shots, he's very, very happy. And then he would turn around and he would walk again. And then Prabhupada walked for about 2 miles. So this Rath Yatra was quite astounding for us. And although it was a very, very cold day and there weren't so many people in the streets or actually following the procession, it was so potent and so powerful. It was as though Srila Prabhupada had conquered the whole of Melbourne. It was like he was the king of the whole of Melbourne. Everything stopped for Srila Prabhupada, right? And look how much ecstasy is in there, right? And the devotees all present felt that like this was the centre of the universe, because Srila Prabhupada was there and Lord Chaitanya was there and Lord Jagannath was there. So it was a very, very ecstatic program.
I remember that Bhai Bhabhi had stumbled upon a technique called anodization, where she made breastplates and armlets for the deities, Jagannath, Subhadra, Balaram, out of foam. And then you submerge them in a solution which would make them shine like silver, shine like gold. And so we'd bedecked Lord Jagannath and Balaram with these wonderful warrior-like breastplates, and I think there were even Kshatriya turbans and armlets on them. They just looked gorgeous. Prabhupada walked a lot of that route, I think the entirety of it. And I remember there was a fellow, I think his name was Bob Jones, who had a big karate school in Australia at the time. And he provided a couple of bodyguards for Prabhupada. They walked on either side.
That's me playing the big bass drum. Sometimes we'd have a big kirtan in Sydney Temple, and just as a kind of embellishment, Madhavisa brought out a big bass drum one time. And I used to be a drummer in a rock and roll band before I joined the Hare Krishna movement. So I would put on the bass drum, and it would kind of give a bit of an extra thump, a bit of an extra impetus to the kirtan. So when we had Rath Yatra, myself and my brother Jamal Arjun would strap on these big marching band bass drums and play them in a kind of rhythmic mridanga type, what we call the Nam Hata beat, the sort of moving, kind of exciting sort of rhythm. And it would add a new dimension to the kirtan and to the Rath Yatra parade. It was very nice to see Srila Prabhupada coming off the Rath cart and actually walking in the Rath Yatra procession with us.
We had the 3 carts, and we had Subhadra's cart set up for Prabhupada to ride the whole way. Very comfortable, big Vyasa sign on the front. And I was very fortunate. I was going to be on the cart there because I was the pujari for Subhadra, so I was sitting right up there alongside Prabhupada. And I was thrilled. But then I was very demoralized because Prabhupada didn't get on the cart, because he was so attracted to and fascinated by the big gold and Lord Chaitanya that we'd made. And he just loved to walk alongside it and dance with it. And so he wouldn't get on the cart. He walked the whole parade. It was cold, and it seems like it was about 3 miles long, but he danced and walked the whole way. When we got to the end of the parade, then he got onto the cart inside of the hall, and at that time he gave the lecture. sitting on the cart. But I don't think I'd slept for several days because we were making the carts and there were so many things going on preparing for Prabhupada's coming. And I was falling asleep on my feet. So when Prabhupada started giving his lecture and I was fanning Subhadra, I just kept falling asleep. Lady Subhadra was very kind and Prabhupada just kind of glanced now and again. I can't imagine what he was thinking, but I did my best to stay awake. We would do that in those days. We would just work so hard that we couldn't survive when Prabhupada actually arrived. We're all preparing for him to come, and then we missed half the classes.
I was reading a letter yesterday that Prabhupada said, I appreciated very much how you were leading the kirtan and at the same time taking care of my personal. While we were walking along on the Rath Yatra festival, you wouldn't think that Prabhupada would observe that, but he saw how I was leading the kirtan and at the same time taking care of his personal. That's the way he worded it. In other words, making sure that, you know, everybody was around Srila Prabhupada and not blocking the way.
I'd had books which I had purchased a couple of years before when I was an attorney downtown, and I had those books on my bookcase, and occasionally I'd pick up a Bhagavatam and try and read it to see if I could understand it, because I never really understand. I couldn't make head or tail of it. But I knew, somehow or another, I knew that this was it. This was the truth. This was the real thing. And also Prabhupada, I just had the conviction that this person, he was a person who had no ego, and that he stood for what was the truth. And then just prior to the Rath Yatra, on the Thursday, I was on my way to one of my favourite jaunts, a wine bar, and next to the wine bar there was a big poster which was promoting the Rath Yatra and Prabhupada. And on the post there was a beautiful picture of Prabhupada with the caption that said, "At whose feet all the masters sit." And it really impacted on me. And I looked at the poster and I thought, yes. So then the Saturday came around, so I went to the Rath Yatra. And then in the distance I saw these amazing, huge chariots. There were 3 of them with amazing canopies, and this amazing statue, which was maybe 30, 40 feet high, of this golden personality with his arms in the air. And there was literally hundreds of devotees, it appeared to me, were dancing ecstatically and blissfully, and it was just a swirl of colour and movement. There was a couple of marching bass drums, and it was just a wonderful sight. I was just struck with wonder. And then in the middle of the chanting party was this diminutive personality, Srila Prabhupada, who I had recognized from the books and from the poster. When I first saw him, he was actually dancing blissfully with his arms in the air. I could see all the devotees were completely caught up in rapture. So it appeared to me, in retrospect, Prabhupada was like the full moon surrounded by the stars in the sky on a cloudless night. It was just a wonderful sight to behold, and I was just completely overcome with joy myself at seeing it. At this stage I was hooked. And so I followed the procession up the street and into the exhibition buildings, and there Prabhupada gave a lecture, but I really couldn't understand what he was saying. But it was something that was totally out of this world, and something that I just felt, this is it, and I want to be a part of this, whatever it is. But I was caught up. I had Prabhupada fever very quickly. I mean, it was very contagious. It was spreading right throughout, and I caught Prabhupada fever that first time that I saw him, and I still have it today. Apparently it's incurable. Once you catch Prabhupada fever, you have it forever.
Over the years, I've met many, many people who actually saw the parade and saw Prabhupada on that day. And just a couple of years ago in our restaurant, one lady came in and she told me how that she'd seen our leader on this festival going through the streets of Melbourne, and how she saw this big golden form at the head of the parade leading the procession. And she said it really profoundly affected her, and that over the years, many, many times, she'd had dreams of that particular festival and of that particular golden form of Lord Chaitanya. So that was the potency of Srila Prabhupada and Lord Jagannath and the Rath Yatra festival.
After the Rath Yatra parade, which was extremely successful, we wheeled all 3 carts into the Royal Exhibition buildings, which were the final resting place of the Rath Yatra festival. And Prabhupada gave a nice lecture from the cart. After his lecture, he came down the stairs and he rested on a chair in a small room as we were preparing to distribute the feast. And one of Prabhupada's disciples, Gopinath Acharya, entered the room with some incense.
So Srila Prabhupada is sitting in there resting a little on a seat, and Deepak Prabhu introduced me to Srila Prabhupada and said, "Oh, this is Gopinath Acharya Das, he's one of our leading book distributors." So Srila Prabhupada was actually very interested. And he turned his head very regally, looked at me and asked me what I said to sell the books. So I mumbled and fumbled something to the effect that, "Oh, Srila Prabhupada, I just tell them it's about yoga. They think it's about exercises." And like that. And Srila Prabhupada thought very pensively for, 30 seconds or so, and he said, "You should tell people that these books will solve the problems of life and help reduce the miseries of life." In retrospect, I believe Srila Prabhupada must have been thinking of the verse from the first canto of Srimad Bhagavatam, "Anato pasamam sakshat, bhakti yoga madhokshati, lokasya janato vidvans chakris satvita sanghitam." The material miseries of the living entity, which is superfluous to him, can be directly mitigated by the linking process of devotional service. But the mass of people do not know this, and therefore the learned Vyasadeva compiled the Srimad Bhagavatam. So I felt very blessed to be privy to Srila Prabhupada's personal instruction what to say to distribute his books. Unfortunately, I hadn't been able to introduce that kind of presentation on the street when we were selling books for many years. But later on, when we were selling Srila Prabhupada's sets of books, that proved to be very successful. People warm up to that. Actually, everyone is suffering. And Srila Prabhupada's real business was to somehow or another give people some happiness through Krishna consciousness. So then he began to speak about the prediction in the Chaitanya Bhagavat, Pratibhate Atejato Nagaradigram, Savachapachaho Monam, that Lord Chaitanya's name would be heard in every town and village. So Srila Prabhupada went on to say that this means that there will be a Radha Krishna temple in every town and village, with at least 6 brahmanas to worship the deity.
The next day I was told that there was a big program down at Ormond Hall. I used to go to Ormond Hall back in the mid-60s when I was a jazzer, and jazz bands used to play down there, and so it was one of the joints that we used to frequent. And so I went to Ormond Hall and I walked in, and there's this amazing kirtan going on. And Lord Chaitanya, there's once again that golden figure is in the middle of the room. And the devotees are just ecstatically dancing around. It was an ecstatic, a blissful kirtan. Once again, we had those marching bass drums. I think there was about 3 of them. And the devotees were just wild with enthusiasm. And they were just dancing around like Indians surrounding a wagon train, whooping, and it was just once again another amazing sight. By this time, after seeing Prabhupada and the devotees at Rath Yatra, seeing Prabhupada gliding past me at the temple, and then seeing this wonderful sight at Ormond Hall, and then Prabhupada walking in and giving a lecture once again. I couldn't understand what he was saying. But by this time I was completely convinced that yes, I have to become a devotee. So virtually a couple of days after that, I moved into the temple, and a day after that I was out on the street selling incense and collecting donations.
We had big ecstatic kirtan around Lord Chaitanya for about 45 minutes. Madhavisa was leading, and it was such an ecstatic kirtan that when Madhavisa stopped the chanting, Prabhupada motioned like this to continue. right? He was just in ecstasy watching and hearing the kirtan. He loved Mother Lisa's kirtan so much. Then after that, he gave a lecture, and then after the lecture, another nice feast was served, especially after the festival the day before when we had a big program and a big feast. He was very pleased with that. But then the next day, it was on a Sunday, another big feast was served, and he said, "Who has cooked this?" He was very, very pleased that the devotees had gone to so much trouble to cook two beautiful feasts in 2 days.
As usual, my service was to cook a huge feast for the program. As I remember, I had to cook a huge feast, a Kodasi feast. I can't remember exactly everything I made, but I do remember that I was sort of busy during the program that Prabhupada was talking, sort of organising the food and getting it ready to be served out at the end of the program. So I couldn't be present at the whole program. But what we did was arrange all the plates and serve them all out in a room that was nearby or next to this hall where everyone was chanting and hearing Prabhupada talk. And when the program was over and Prabhupada was walking out, he walked past and saw all the plates of prasadam spread out, and he looked at Madhavisa and said, "Oh, who has done all this?" And Madhavisa said, "Dwapayana has done this." And Prabhupada said, "Oh, this is very good."
The large murti of Lord Chaitanya that we see in the Ormond Hall lecture here, that was created by Dormia Das, and Dormia had perfected the art of cold electroplating. He was able to build this murti in pieces and then create a wonderful shiny gold coating, and then with pegs assemble the murti and bring it to various events. It was there at the Rath Yatra festival, and as we can see, Prabhupada encouraged us with a wave of his hand that we all circumambulate the deity, and he was like the general ordering the troops, and just with that little movement of his head and the little movement of his hands, we took his lead and we danced ecstatically around the murti with those very big bass drums that we had used the day before at Rath Yatra.
Hari bol, Hari bol, Hari bol. complete knowledge. So if you read Bhagavad Gita, you get complete knowledge. So what Bhagavan says, idantu te guhyatamang parvakshami anasuyave. Bhagavan Krishna is teaching Arjuna. So in the 9th chapter he says, my dear Arjuna, I am now speaking to you the most confidential knowledge. Guhyatamam. Tamam means superlative. Positive, comparative and superlative. In Sanskrit, Tara Tama. Tara is comparative and Tama means superlative. So here Bhagavan says, the perfect personality of God says, idantu te guhyatamang parvakshami. Now I am speaking to you the most confidential knowledge. Jnanam vijnanam sahitam. The knowledge is with full knowledge, not that an imagination. Jnanam vijnana sahitam. Vijnana means science, practical demonstration. So, jnanam vijnana sahitam. Jajgatya, if you learn this knowledge, Jadgatya mokshase asubha. Asubha. Mokshase means you get liberation, and asubha means inauspicity. Inauspicity. So, our present life, at the present moment, present life means so long we possess this material body, it is full of inauspicity. Mokshase asubha. Asubha means inauspicity. So what is that confidential knowledge? Namo Mahavadannaya Krishna Prema Pradayate Krishnaya Krishna Chaitanya Namine Gauratise Namaha. Srila Rupa Goswami, when he met Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu at Prayag, there is a place, holy place in India, which is called Prayag. So Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, after accepting his renounced order of sannyas, he went to Prayag and other holy places. So Srila Rupa Goswami, he was minister of the government, but he gave up everything and joined this Hare Krishna movement with Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. So when he first met and he offered this verse, Namo Mahavadannaya. Vadanna means the most magnanimous. Yes, Krishna asked that you rascal surrender unto me. You are all rascals, you surrender to Krishna. Then your life will be successful. Yes. This is the sum and substance of Krishna's instruction. Sarvadharman parityajya mamekam saranam bhaja. Krishna is not asking only Arjuna, he is asking all us, all rascals, that you are manufacturing so many things for becoming happy, you will never be happy. Rest assured. But surrender to me and I will make you happy. That's all. One line. So, what can be done? Krishna is offering all opportunities, and we, humble servant of Krishna, we are trying to preach it, but the rascals will not accept it. What can be done? That is the difficulty.